The National Weather Service.
Hello everyone, and thanks you for joining us for this Friday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm Dave Percy, meteorologist with the National Weather Service. Up first, our hazardous weather graphic showing some advisory areas along the Brooks Range here. That's a wind advisory that's out until noon tomorrow, for tonight into noon tomorrow for south or gusty winds through the passes up to as high as 55 miles per hour and west of the Toe Cutoff. And then over toward Tanana and Nana and those areas, Denali, that's a winter weather advisory. Not for additional snow, but the gusty winds that we're seeing have forecasts there for the Alaska Range to the east there. Same wind conditions there will be reduced visibilities due to the blowing snow that's expected in that area. That's out until about noontime tomorrow. And then a winter weather advisory out here for the Kobuk Valley, Noatak Valley, Western Brooks Range, mostly actually north of the valleys here. That's out the entire weekend, actually into Monday at this point, and gusty east winds resulting in reduced visibility, snow and blowing snow in areas across those zones. And moving on to the satellite imagery, a couple of impressive lows here, one pulling back to the west out over the west-northwest Bering Sea, another one here coming up toward and crossing the Alaska Peninsula, producing pretty strong winds as that pulled up. Ahead of the front there, Cold Bay had gusts to 74 miles per hour, peak wind gust. And here this afternoon, that was earlier last night, and this afternoon though, Cape Newton I'm seeing gusts of 66 miles per hour with a band of snow now along the southwest coast and areas back toward the Pribilofs. Mostly rain changing to showers, becoming a little more showery here over the Alaska Peninsula with diminishing winds behind the front. Kind of a narrow band of precipitation, really not making it much headway inland, especially over the Kuskokwim Delta there. Clearing over south central Alaska and the front pushing eastward, pushing mid and high level clouds in across Kodiak, precipitation just to the south there. And another system here over the southeast coast, bringing areas of mostly rain down towards sea level, mixture conditions, higher elevations, and then snow falling there up the Klondike Highway, Haines on toward Skagway in those areas, with some of that moisture sneaking back in toward the Wrangell Mountains here, possibly getting into the Northway area. And then we've got a system, weak system, batch of clouds there dropping east-southeast along the Arctic coast. Really not doing much, just mostly clouds through here. Could be a few flurries there on the upslope areas of the Brooks Range, but not a whole lot. Have some scattered flurries down into the eastern interior areas, and again with this moisture kind of circulating back to the west here around this low center as it pushes in across the southeast coast. Rainfall amounts today roughly around half an inch at Hoonah and just a little under half an inch falling at Cake, so not really too terribly heavy on the precipitation there, and mostly in the form of rain, more of a mixed condition over toward the border, and of course any higher elevations as well. Just seeing snow. Dry day here across south central Alaska with light winds, Prince William Sound into the interior again. A lot of high stuff spreading into the northwest up there, but the main precipitation area here, snow right along the southwest coast, back to the front, kind of dropping in toward the Pribilof Islands. Temperatures in the upper 30s there, so kind of a mixed or heavy wet light snow, and then mixing, and then it's becoming showers there for the eastern Aleutians, which ended this afternoon, and rain on the heavy side. Chignik picking up over 2 inches in the 12-hour period today during the day Friday, while False Pass had 1 1/4 inches, and they were right in the perfect zone there to get that kind of rainfall. That's beginning to shift over toward Kodiak Island. Back to the west, pretty brisk westerly winds here, a couple of troughs, keeping rain and showers in over the western Aleutians, spreading in across the Adak and Atka areas. And moving on to the forecast for tonight, well, this system moves out well into western Canada there, low tracking up into the Yukon, Northwest Territories. So rain will become showery and tend to end, but late tonight and early tomorrow, next batch of moisture starts to show up along the central and south coast areas with maybe a little bit of a break here for the North Gulf Coast, but precipitation won't end completely, so look for occasional rain and snow, or rain mixed with snow shower conditions back in to the southern Kenai Peninsula, and again, not really making it too far inland, at least past the coast range there. Then the gusty winds, wind advisories out for the eastern Alaska range, gusts 55 miles an hour. Areas of blowing snow back to the west, Tanana and Nenana in those locations. And again, up here, tightening gradient, increasing winds. Could see winds gusting in excess of 50 miles an hour up there for the western Brooks Range on out to the areas from Point Lay down to possibly Cape Lisburne, maybe Point Hope. Fair, dry, maybe some clearing there over the northwest coastal areas, Kotzebue Sound, Seward Peninsula. And again, this front elongating eastward, that low tracking east of Kodiak, weakening here, 990 millibars. So not much of a gradient there for Kodiak Island. Look for a gradual increase in the winds here for the North Gulf Coast, and then much windier back out over the Aleutians with southwest winds, lighter behind the front, showery conditions, showers for the Alaska Peninsula, showers periods of there for the eastern Aleutians. Another trough will bring some solid rain or rain and snow into the west central Aleutians, and the colder air back to the west, that'll tend to change over toward snow out toward Chimney and Attu. And looking ahead to Saturday, first day of the weekend tomorrow, that low really doesn't make too much eastward progress, still kind of hanging here south of the Kenai Peninsula. The front, though, all the way up to the coastline of the Panhandle. So periods of rain again tomorrow that starts early tomorrow and begin to just spread over the entire area late in the morning, definitely into the afternoon. This is roughly the 3 p.m. position of that front. Wet along the North Gulf Coast, and again, not too far north on the precipitation advance, kind of hanging up in the coast range there. Could see some in the Wrangles, maybe some snow, and then some of this continues to affect Northway and Tok, those areas, and maybe some flurries and clouds over the interior, and that's about it. Keep with the blowing snow, areas of blowing snow here for the Tanana, Nenana area, and winds diminishing now for the Alaska Range, getting that advisory right now due to end at noon, maybe a little sooner, but not up here in the northwest. This wind advisory pattern stays out through the weekend, and rain and snow, or snow, Yukon Delta, light snow, maybe a little heavier back here to the west over the southern Kuskokwim Valley. Mixture of precipitation down across Kodiak Island, Bristol Bay, to just plain rain there for the Aleutian Range. Scattered showers, eastern Aleutians. That front advances eastward here, bringing the rain into Adak, and then Atka, and then barreling in on Nikolsky for early Saturday evening. Then we'll see on Sunday that system lifts northward and weakens considerably here into the coastal areas of the Russian Far East. A couple of troughs out ahead of that swinging in keeps it unsettled here from actually the Seward Peninsula, St. Lawrence Island, back down into northeast Bristol Bay with numerous scattered snow showers, actually pretty scattered down here, maybe a little more numerous back to the northwest. Another weak trough right through there, Pribilofs into the southeast, bearing down the Alaska Peninsula, some scattered showers, but a much stronger storm, 954 millibars, and you can see the tight pressure field associated with that in advance of the front. Definitely gale and storm force winds with that as it moves into the west central Aleutians during the day on Sunday and into the afternoon. Otherwise, this system staying to the south of the Panhandle, so you're just looking at less in the way of precipitation, especially down south here during the day on Sunday, with rain and snow continuing, periods of light along the North Gulf Coast, again possibly up to the Wrangell Mountain areas, maybe a little more extensive with the Copper River Basin, possibly in the upslope around the mountains there, but south central Alaska, Susitna Valley through Cook Inlet looking really good. Maybe some clearing, definitely precipitation free, light winds down into Kodiak Island, risk of a snow shower, and not much change over the interior here, just variably cloudy, maybe a few flurries there from the Koyukuk Valley around Bettles on over toward or just south of the Eagle area. And moving on to the lows for tonight, below zero, and highs for tomorrow a little above zero there in the northeast, upper 30s there down to the south, upper 30s to mid 40s for the Panhandle. Low temperatures Sunday morning, a little chillier up here in the northeast, 10 to 20 below. Mid to upper or lower to mid 30s here in the southwest, and then taking a look at the highs for Sunday afternoon. A little below zero, North Slope Arctic coast to 30s, upper 30s over the Aleutians, and mid to upper 30s there over the Panhandle.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving into flying weather, a lot of IFR here across the northern part of the Bering Sea in a swath from St. Matthew Island right up along the southwest coast there, Nunivak Island, on just south of Kuskokwim Bay there into Togiak Bay and on into the southwest mountains. Also along the Aleutian Range here on the east and southeast sides, and some IFR up here. It looks like along the White Mountains, slipping on down into the eastern interior, north slope central areas. And IFR covering a fair amount of the southeast coast here, improving down toward Dixon Entrance. IFR here over the southern Gulf of Alaska, extending on into the east side of Kodiak and Fognak Islands. And then for tomorrow afternoon, got this band up along the southwest coast now to about Kodiak, back to the west there, just catching St. Lawrence Island. And then better conditions on up, looks like VFR, Norton Sound, Seward Peninsula, much of the western central interior, IFR, North Slope into the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, and then IFR here over the eastern interior. Southeast coast pretty well IFR'd in, and areas of there along the North Gulf Coast. For Sunday morning, this area continues to push inland here, right up to or just past the Alaska Range into Kachemak Bay, possibly northern Bristol Bay, all the southwest interior back out across St. Lawrence Island, lifting northward, marginal VFR back to the Pribilofs and the Bering Sea side of the eastern Aleutians. Otherwise, VFR central interior, IFR eastern Beaufort Sea coast. And then for Sunday afternoon, this remains kind of stationary here. Slips a little farther to the north, but not much, but pretty well IFR here for Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, Kuskokwim Valley, right over to the Alaska Range, on down into northeast Bristol Bay. And then we've got, looks like VFR here now for Cook Inlet, Kenai Peninsula, Prince William Sound, Susitna and Matanuska Valleys, a big chunk of the interior area, and still some persistent IFR there, eastern Beaufort Sea coast, and also the southeast interior, mostly along the Wrangell Mountains. Coast range here down across the northern Panhandle marginal to the south. Passes shaping up like this, both Anatuvik and Adigan. VFR, be some clouds, but the VFR variety for both passes. And Lake Clark and Merrill, marginal VFR, lowest conditions eastern entrance. Rainy though, I think will be VFR. And hopefully windy VFR, both sides of the pass. And through the pass, Isabel, marginal. Mintasta looking marginal. And Tanita, VFR. For Portage though, IFR coming in late tonight, especially on the eastern entrance, IFR east side, otherwise marginal on out to the west. Chilkoot and White, IFR throughout the entire day. And for freezing levels at the surface here, southwest interior, up along the North Gulf Coast, cutting southeastward there, along the border there, the Panhandle, 2,000 feet, Kodiak Island, up across the Alaska Peninsula, into the southeast Bering, and taking a look at the icing. Areas of that system and southeast flow, so increasing moisture here for the North Gulf Coast. Could be some considerable moderate rime icing here above 5,000 feet for the eastern North Gulf Coast, Cape Yakataga to Yakutat, maybe over the northern Panhandle. Otherwise, just isolated moderate here in the other shaded area, southwest coast on out to just south of St. Lawrence Island, and then on down into the Dixon Entrance, Queen Charlotte area, and along the Alaska Peninsula here. Otherwise, just some hit and miss areas on out to the west. And moving on to the jet stream, again, strong jet coming across the Pacific here, 140, 60 knots, splits and diverges right through this area about 155 west. One weaker branch up and then southeast around the ridge over us today, lifting northward as this trough swings northward, and kind of a northwest jet there catching the extreme eastern Beaufort Sea coast there, mostly into the Mackenzie River Bay area, and then another branch in south of the Panhandle. 9,000 feet, pretty gusty wind, or pretty good winds up here, western Arctic coast to 35 knots, 30 to 35 knots into the Bering Strait, 25 back south in this more south-southwesterly flow, and then south of the low center here, a tighter gradient. We've got westerlies going at about 35 to 40 knots, and lighter winds, 20 to 25 out of the east along the North Gulf Coast. 3,000 feet, 20 to 30 knot winds on the southern Panhandle, and up to 45 there, western Arctic coast, 35 down to the Bering Strait. Southwest flow, 25 to 35, weakens here with the trough axis right through here, so about 20 knots coming into the Nunivak Island area. Westerlies, 40 to 55 knots over the southern Bering Sea, just catching barely the Aleutians. And turbulence-wise, considerable moderate chop here, eastern Aleutians, false pass all the way out to Shemya. Not so much of the Alaska Peninsula and the southwest interior, much of the northwest and along the southeast coast, mostly over the central and southern Panhandle.
Thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and joining us today is Eric Stevens from GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Thank you for joining us, Eric.
My pleasure, Dave.
Thank you. And you're joining us here to talk a little bit more about satellites and how satellites work, and especially one neat feature that's working over Alaska right now. What is that?
Well, there's a lot of weather satellites and a lot of instruments on these satellites, and there are new generations going up and new instruments. This includes something called the day-night band, which is not a cover band at the local bar, but it's a new satellite that is very useful, especially here in Alaska, especially in the winter.
In the wintertime, yeah, that makes it a little bit hard to use some of the normal tools that we associate with weather satellite imagery.
Right. You know, one of the classic weather satellite instruments is just visible light. What would the human eye see? If you were riding on a weather satellite yourself and looked down, and it was black and white, you'd see the clouds reflecting the sunlight. And we've got an example from the Pacific Ocean. There's a geostationary satellite, and we can see that the eastern side of the image is in daylight. The western side, it's night over there, so you don't see anything because there's no sunlight over there. And visible imagery, it's very intuitive. You see the clouds just like you see them standing on the ground, but now you're a satellite seeing them from above. But the problem is, what about the night side of the planet? How do you track the storms? How do you know where the rain is, the snow, the weather, if you can't see the clouds? And that's why, just like a television can change from one channel to another, or radio can change stations, satellites can change the frequency of the electromagnetic spectrum that they're looking at. We can go to infrared instead of visible light. You know, it's heat energy. You can see heat, and we've got another satellite picture from the same time, same satellite, out over the Pacific Ocean. That's the infrared side, and we're seeing temperature there. And even at night, when there's no light, everything still has a temperature.
So we're sensing something with a thermometer instead of perhaps the visible side of that, is what you're saying?
That's right. On this depiction, colder features are lighter shades, warmer features are dark. And so clouds tend to be colder than the ground. Clouds are higher in the atmosphere, it's cooler. And so that very same image on the western or the left-hand side of the globe, now we can see the clouds there, even though it's nighttime, because we're seeing the temperatures. And one nice feature is that tropical storm there, just in the middle of the northern hemisphere there, hurricane or typhoon, depending on...
That's that swirly part that we see in the middle of the image?
There you go. You can even see the eye on it there, especially in the infrared image. So we've got two kinds of imagery there from the same satellite, different instruments, you know, different channels like on a television, visible and infrared. You know, it turns out there's no one magic tool. Each has its strengths, each has its flaws, weaknesses. The visible is nice, it's intuitive, it's easy to understand, but doesn't work at night. Infrared is nice, it works at night, you can see temperatures, but there is a catch. What if your clouds and the nearby bare ground or open water, what if those were about the same temperature?
Oh, that's going to be hard to figure out what's going on.
If you can only see temperature and you have two features that are the same temperature, they will look the same. You won't be able to tell. They're camouflaged. This happens, especially, it can happen around Alaska, especially over the ocean when you have low clouds that are the same temperature as the open water.
That happens quite a bit in Alaska.
We have an example. Now, this is from a different geostationary satellite. It's down over the Atlantic Ocean. Look in the South Atlantic. In infrared, we've highlighted in a yellow circle there. There's some patches of clouds, but it looks like there's a clear area in the middle of that image. That's the infrared look. But let's take a look at the visible channel, and we can see there's a stripe of clouds across the middle of that circle that is only visible in the visible. The trick here is that those are low clouds of about the same temperature as the surrounding ocean. So from an infrared point of view, where you're seeing temperature, the clouds in the water nearby are the same temperature, they look the same. It's only on the visible that you can see what stands out as the actual imagery. Two tools, each have their strengths and weaknesses. Can we combine them? That's where the day-night band comes in. It's a super sensitive visible sensor that can actually see by moonlight. It can even see the aurora. And in Alaska, we have long winter nights. We can use that day-night band. Here's an example from that storm that blew the Kullik drilling platform ashore near Kodiak Island in December back in 2012. This image is right near when that storm happened, and it's in the middle of the night in December.
But this looks like visible imagery.
Looks like daytime imagery. It's amazing. That sensor can take any little bit of moonlight and just make the most of it. And we can see so much detail. Even in the northern part of the image there, you can see some aurora. up there. The northern lights
That's that band that goes across the Arctic slope?
You got it. That's the northern lights. We're seeing black and white image here, so
Yeah.
you don't get the green or the purple colors
How
there.
about that?
But that is the aurora. There's another example of the day-night band, and this is from January of 2013. It's about 4 in the morning, and this is a snapshot from Weather Service software. And we can even see in the middle of the image, there's the lights of Fairbanks and North Pole over to Eielson Air Force Base. Anchorage and Matsu lights, city lights, are evident as well.
Sure
We can see, even though it's 4 in the morning in January, there is no sunlight to be had, that just enough moonlight is available that this sensor can see that. So we're trying to solve that puzzle where visible light is good, but only during the daytime. IR is good at night, but you can't see the difference between clouds and ground sometime.
Right.
The day-night band is an attempt to do the best of both with one tool. And it's brand new for Alaska here, and we're hoping to use it in the forecast process and help predict storms, weather patterns, to help get good forecast for people.
Okay, another tool in the weather toolkit for meteorologists in Alaska and researchers worldwide. Thank you so much, Eric, for joining us today. And you can learn more about Dehne and the day-night band by going to the web address that you see on your screen. For Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider. And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Looking at today's sea ice analysis. Continuing to gradually fill in here between the Strait and St. Lawrence Island, and continued easterly winds mean that ice will continue to tend to pull away from the coast and head out west here. So it could be some opening up areas possibly anywhere along the southwest coast, especially when the winds are stronger. And for the marine forecast, we've got gales out for the southeast coast here. West 35 on the south coast, and then southeast 35 on up the coastline, turning east 30 to 35 knots. Gales for Clarence Strait ahead of that front. Southeast 35, 25 gusts 40, Stevens Passage. Not too bad, Lynn Canal just 15. And then for Sunday, north 25 knots there, northern Lynn Canal, maybe some higher gusts, 4-foot seas. Northeast 20 for Stevens Passage, seas 3 feet. Light winds now out of the north for Clarence Strait. Really light winds here from the north or northeast for the entire stretch of the coastline, but seas still hanging up there at about 12 feet, so small craft advisories. And for Prince William Sound tomorrow, small craft advisories, east 25, but seas at 4 feet. Got gales here all along the North Gulf Coast, 35 knots, 12 to 13-foot seas, and then those pick up to about 40 knots there for the Barrens. And northeast 35 here, Kachemak Bay, southern Cook Inlet, north of the Forelands, north at 20 with 4-foot seas. And then for Sunday, northeast coming down just 10 knots, barely a breeze there, northern Cook Inlet, 15-knot winds on down to the south. North 20 for the Barrens, southeast 15 for the western North Gulf Coast. Much lighter winds in store for Sunday here for all these areas, south 15, east 15 for Prince William Sound. And for Kodiak Island, southwest 30 knots there, scooting up the east side, while Shelikof Strait will see a northeast wind at 30 knots with 10-foot seas. West 30 knots. 18-foot seas there, Sitka to Castle Cape, Alaska Peninsula, southwest 25, Bristol Bay south at 20. And then for Sunday, here for Kodiak, coming down to 15 there for Shelikof Strait, the east side there, west 25 knots with 13-foot seas. That similar wind pattern extends all the way down to Castle Cape here in the zone southwest of Kodiak, 25 knots, 15 to 20-knot winds here for the Alaska Peninsula, southwest on the Bering Sea side, west 20 with 14-foot seas on the Pacific side and 15 for Bristol Bay. And for the Aleutians, start with the Fox Islands tomorrow. On Alaska Island, southwest at about 30 knots, back to the west here, minimum gales coming eastward there with the front, and then gales for sure out toward Adak and Atka, but only in that 35-knot range, 15 to 25-foot seas, picking up 40 to eventually 45 knots out of the west there for the far western zone of seas over 20 feet. And then east, 40 knots there, Kiska Island on out to Shimei and Atuba. Storm warning coming into the picture now. That next big system coming up from the south here for the western central Aleutians. Again, strongest on the Pacific side here south of Adak and Atka, but still south 45 even on the north side. And then we've got gales cutting off, becoming much lighter there, especially for Unalaska Island, southwest 20 to 25. And for the southwest coast, south of Nunivak Island, south 20 knots, seas 7 feet, southeast 30 knots, 9-foot seas there. North of Nunivak Island, taking a turn more easterly up towards St. Lawrence Island, those seas building to 13 feet. Southeast 30 with 14-foot seas for St. Matthew Island, southwest 25, 13-foot seas for the Pribilofs. And for the next day, small craft advisories continue for St. Paul, lighter here south of Nunivak Island, southeast 25, St. Lawrence Island, southwest 30 for St. Matthew Island. Eastern Beaufort Sea coast tomorrow. Northeast winds at about 20 knots. Brisk wind advisories kick in here for the central coast, and those become gales for the east side from all of the along the western coastline there, all the way down to Cape Beaufort to Cape Thompson, actually, with east winds of 35 knots, a little lighter, coming under the threshold there for the Chukchi Sea. And then on Sunday, we're looking southeast 25, brisk wind advisories up to Cape Beaufort, gales here for the western coast. 25 brisk wind advisory central coast, coming down to 20 and then toward 15 knots to the east. For tonight again, wind diminishing here for the Alaska Peninsula along with the rain, but pretty wet for Kodiak Island, and a narrow band of precipitation, rain or snow here across the southwest, really not making too much headway inland. Along the North Gulf Coast, periods of rain and snow, and diminishing drier conditions tonight for the Panhandle, but more rain moving in late tonight to the south coast. That'll spread over the entire area throughout the morning tomorrow as that front pushes in and the gales in advance of the front. Wet for the North Gulf Coast, especially the immediate coastline, and along this weakening frontal boundary here in the southwest, which we'll see weakens further on Sunday.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.
The National Weather Service.